Hi, hello, it's Nikki, and welcome to my messy bookshelf. Today I'm here with the Reading Shifts tag, and this is a tag that was created by Hannah's Books, and there are some really thought-provoking and wonderful questions in this tag. I really enjoyed Hannah's video with these questions, and she's so much more articulate than I am, but I will make an attempt to answer these questions. And I was tagged by Nicole at Noteworthy Fiction. So thank you, Hannah, for creating the tag, and thank you, Nicole, for tagging me in this tag. So it seems to be just reflecting on how our reading has changed over time. And I love reflective questions like this. So let's get into them. So I'm looking down at my laptop. So the first question is, how has your reading developed over your lifetime? Do the kind of books that bring you the most pleasure now differ from the books you loved most earlier in your life? If you've seen big changes in your reading since you've matured, what might explain your changing interests? And I think for me, there are some aspects of my reading life that have changed drastically, the kinds of books that I like. But there are some that are still around from the very beginning. For instance, mysteries. I started my adult reading life, if you will, as an Agatha Christie fan, and I just loved mystery novels. And I continued that into my adulthood, and I am still a lover of mystery novels. Some other things that did change were historical fiction. I read a lot of historical fiction when I was younger, particularly when I was a teenager. And my goal was to go into the history field. I wasn't quite sure if I wanted to be a history teacher or a historian. I had this grand idea of becoming an archaeologist one day when I was younger. So just history fascinated me. And that is what I eventually went to study when I first went to college after high school. And I used to love historical novels centered on actual historical figures. And I found myself over time, as I learned more and I started reading more actual history books, that a lot of the historical novels that I had read when I was younger were actually kind of poorly researched. I'll just leave it at that. And I used to get very frustrated when I would learn that certain facts or certain things were not entirely accurate. So that kind of started my decline in historical fiction. I am starting to get back into historical fiction, but now I like to know a little bit of the topic that I am reading historical fiction in. And another genre that I have seen a bit of a decline in is fantasy. With fantasy, I, like everyone else almost, I was a huge fan of Lord of the Rings. I spent many of my young years reading not only The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, but also lots of other different fantasy novels. And I read tons of books by Mercedes Lackey and just anything with dragons and magic, and it was a pure escape for me. And I think the Mists of Avalon, the Mary Stuart Merlin books, I just used to love those. And I found myself when I was getting older not really being as into them as much. But I still love Lord of the Rings, and I still love those other books, but I just found myself wanting something a little more mature. I'm trying to think of any other big changes that I've seen in my reading life. I think I read less series as well. I used to check out series out of the library, or I would check out a book and read it and love it, and then immediately go to the next book and the next book and the next book. And I very rarely do that anymore, except I am doing it right at this moment with a very popular series that is out right now. But we're not going to talk about that right now. I think, yeah, just growing up and reading more diversely has sort of changed and shifted the way that I read now. So I have explored different genres. I have read many more classics, and I think that has made me crave more well-written books, though I do enjoy many of the books from my childhood and my teenage years. All right, moving on to the next question. Do you find yourself choosing different kinds of books at different periods of the year? For example, do the seasons affect what you read for pleasure? Similarly, might you read very different kinds of books while on vacation? And the answer to that is definitely yes. I am the textbook example of a mood reader. I read by mood, and my moods do cycle. I do have seasons, usually coinciding with the actual seasons in, where I live, but I am very much a seasonal reader, and also the moods that I have that are outside of, like the festive season and fall and things like that. Aside from that, I do have seasons in what I read. For instance, I find myself in the winter time, after Christmas and New Year's, I find myself wanting very long fantasy novels. I find myself in that mood a lot. Around Christmas, I want festive books. I definitely love reading Christmas, heartwarming stories at Christmas time, but I also love ghost stories and very dark stories simultaneously. So, for instance, this past year, I went into a whole phase of reading tons of dystopian novels, but also some festive stuff as well. So that is my December reading. In the fall, I like dark and gloomy books, and that comes back throughout the year though. And then in the summer, I love fun books, but I also tend to really enjoy longer books, which is why Big Book Summer works out so well for me. So I find myself in the winter and the summer wanting to read very long books and epic fantasy and things like that. The times that I have reread Lord of the Rings has usually been in January and February. So yeah, I definitely do have moods for sure. And yeah, I mean, being on Booktube, now I associate March with middle grade. I associate March with mammoth books. So I am reading bigger books more throughout the year now. Alrighty. Number 3, do specific experiences in your life ever shape what you choose to read? For example, did you read obsessively about child rearing when your kids were little, about gardening as spring is about to begin, about the experience of grief when someone you love died, etc.? And for the most part, I would say yes. When I became a mother, I was obsessively reading books about babies and children, and even before I gave birth. But as they were growing up, I read a lot about education. I wanted to homeschool, but I was a full-time working mother in the military, so that was not an option for me. But I still read about it because I wanted to learn about the types of things that I should be looking at when it came to their education. So definitely child rearing. Gardening, yes. I have attempted a garden many times, but I am very scared of spiders. So after I harvest, vegetables a few times, I usually get scared off by some big spider. So, but yeah, other things, when I am into a specific crafting hobby, I will check out books from the library about that, or I will purchase books about whatever it is. So definitely. Now, the one I would say that I do not, that I have a hard time with is reading about grief. After my mother passed away, I had a very difficult time reading about grief. And honestly, it's really this past year and this year where I'm finally able to read about that kind of stuff, because it was a few years. It's been 5 years now, almost, and it took me more than 4 years to be able to read that kind of stuff. So I am not someone who can read about very horrific experiences that I just went through. Moving on, question 4, and I'm sorry, I keep looking down. Have there been any times in your life when circumstances have limited or changed your reading in some way? Perhaps caretaking, responsibilities, or a big move that made it hard to find as much time to read as you'd like? Or personal illness that made it harder to concentrate? Or maybe just long-term travel that might have limited your book choices? How do you deal with those circumstances? This is an interesting question for me because I am in a period of change in my life. So I mean, some of you may have been already subscribed to me and known that I went on a hiatus late summer. I think from August to October I was gone, and I was in a major time of not reading, and that is because I had a lot of family coming into town, and I was focused on my upcoming retirement. I didn't retire until December, but I did have my retirement ceremony from the military at the end of September. And all of that time around September, I was very busy trying to get my life together and get plans in place to transition outside of the military. So those of you who know someone who's been in the military or have been in yourself know that it's more time consuming to get out than it is to come in. So I was very busy. I did very little reading. I think the only thing that I read during that time period was finishing up Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, which I had started for Big Book Summer last year. So things like that. But I also, because again, and I hate to keep bringing it up, I was in the military. So I deployed several times. And when I used to go on deployments, I used to love to bring very big books with me because I wasn't going anywhere. So I helped keep my mind off of where I was and what I was doing, while also, providing an escape, but also there's nothing else to do. So I read some of the biggest books that I've ever read while I was deployed. So I think I read War and Peace and Anna Karenina on the same deployment. So definitely longer books for situations like that. That is not something I am dealing with anymore as of December. And now, when I travel, I tend to bring more gripping, fast-paced books, like the kind of thing you would want to read on an airplane. I am not going to be focused on War and Peace while sitting on an airplane or in the airport, but a thriller or something like that, definitely. So yeah, those kinds of situations definitely dictate how I read. As far as caretaking, I found when my mother was ill that reading, I don't think I changed anything that I read, but I definitely enjoyed reading because it was definitely an escape. It's always been an escape for me. Number 5, Booktube is full of discussions of reading slumps, when dedicated readers seem to lose interest for a while in books. Sometimes they just can't find a book that appeals to them. Have you ever experienced a slump? There's a fruit fly in here. I'm so sorry. If so, how did you handle it? If not, do you have any advice to give people who are experiencing slumps? Thankfully, I have experienced very few slumps. I think after I finished Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell last year, that would be the last sort of slump that I can remember. And there were external factors for that. And also it was a very long book. So for me, when I feel like a slump is impending, I will usually, the thing that works for me and that I recommend to anyone else is to reread an old favorite. I love rereading some of my cozy favorites. And by cozy, I mean murder mysteries and gothic romances. So, yeah. Number 6, booktubers also talk about book hangovers, when readers are so moved by a book that they find it difficult to move on to a new book. Have you ever felt this way? I have felt this way a number of times. Honestly, I think I would say that I can relate to this feeling more than the book slump. Though, I mean, like I said, I have had reading slumps. Book hangovers, I'm trying to think what the last reading hangover that I had was. I think it was The Nightingale. I think it was The Nightingale last year. But yes, when I read The Count of Monte Cristo, I think that sort of affected me with trying to keep up with middle grade. I just felt that book. That book was just so special to me. So I had a very difficult time after that one. Don Quixote, yeah, there are certain books that just, they speak to me. They speak to me. And I have a difficult time moving on to other things. But I usually will force myself to move on to other things. Number 7. Tell us about a few books that almost always work for you. Something that might have remained a favorite throughout your life despite any changing reading tastes. Something that always seems to hit just the right spot when you need a lift. Or perhaps some lifetime book hangover where the text will always be at the back of your mind. And I think I've mentioned a few of them already. The Lord of the Rings trilogy, specifically The Fellowship of the Ring. That book is everything, or it was everything, it is everything that I could possibly want in a book. Just everything. The adventure, the characters, the plot, the pacing. You know, there's a little bit of romance, but there's lots of adventure, and I just love it. So definitely The Fellowship of the Ring. And Then There Were None, which I speak about way too often. And pretty much most Hercule Poirot novels. So any Agatha Christie that has Poirot in it. And Victoria Holt, little known now author who wrote gothic romances. And I also loved her historical fiction novels under the pen name Jean Plaidy. Those books, they're just so well researched and gothic and mysterious, and they are books that I read over and over and over again as a teenager. So, and they also remind me of my mother, so they are cozy for me, even though they're mysterious and dark. So those books are usually the ones that I will pick up when I am facing that sort of situation. And that is probably the reason why I have read some of those books like dozens of times. But yeah, I think that is the end of the tag. I will tag some friends below, and I thank you so much if you made it to the end of this video. I really enjoyed these questions. But yeah, I thank you so much, and I hope to see you in the next video. Take care.